Console wars used to be fun. At least, I thought they were, but I was also a kid. I mean, over time it obviously evolved from simple child play to flat-out bullying, and now it's just a cesspool of online toxicity. But at its core, console wars made a lot of sense. Video games were designed very differently. They used different architectures. Many experiences were built from the ground up, and you basically could not get the identical experience if you were to jump from one console to the other. This obviously has withered away over time, but the tribal nature of the buyers of these consoles not only continued on for quite a while, but it had many negative effects to us as a gaming industry, as well as probably as a society. I covered the downside of the fanboy stuff in a previous video, so I'll put that to the side for now, because this time I'd like to focus a little bit more on the actual consoles themselves and how we got to the point where we are now, and why I think this is actually a detriment. Despite the fact that there are some positives in the industry from a customer standpoint in regards to being able to play different games on different devices. And I'm starting from the 90s because that's when I was in grade school. You basically initially had Sega versus Nintendo. Looking back now, it seems like they were very similar consoles, but back in the day they were designed pretty differently. So much so that if you were to buy Disney's Aladdin, it would be a completely different experience depending on which console you bought it on. With the Sega Genesis making a splash in the industry, it forced Nintendo to drop down the prices of the SNES. And likewise, with the success of all the Mario games, it forced Sega to make sure their console remained competitive, and they in turn dropped down the prices. This was a massive benefit of the competition. It would force the other console to want to beat out the other one by lowering the cost of its own console as well as the games. As time went on, you saw the same thing happen again when the PlayStation released. It came in at a high price in 1995 and then immediately dropped down drastically to remain competitive with the upcoming Nintendo 64. And then the two consoles continued to drop the prices back and forth in order to make sure that when the sales were coming around, people were going towards their system, oftentimes leading to both of those consoles being cheaper. In the next generation, the PlayStation 2 came in at a super high price. When the Xbox launched, the PlayStation 2 lowered its price to match the Xbox. And when Nintendo was worried about the sales of the GameCube, they lowered their console's price even further. I go into further detail on all this on my 2 videos about the costs of gaming. But the point is that during the 90s and leading up into the early 2000s, you saw these consoles going head to head and dropping their prices in order to win over the fandom. The competition was healthy. The competition was beneficial. I didn't really mention Sega because in the Saturn generation, it dropped down drastically, and in the Dreamcast generation, they had to bow out completely from the console game. And many people thought Nintendo would be doing something similar. Now, Nintendo did effectively yield. They bowed out of the primary competition that they had been participating in for the previous 2 generations. Or, I guess 3. They were no longer interested in being the primary flagship, the newest tech on the market. And you can argue it's because by the mid-2000s, they were being beaten by 2 competitors, Sony and Microsoft. The 360 and the PlayStation 3 were effectively the modern-day version of the Nintendo versus Sega stuff that occurred a little over a decade prior. Nintendo at this point began to develop its own market. They went after the non-gamers, the casual people, and they did that with the motion controls. You know the story. The Wii was a phenomena, etc., etc. But the 360 and the PlayStation 3 were going head-to-head. The 360, releasing a year prior to the PlayStation 3, built a strong enough user base and gave people an entirely viable alternative that more or less forced Sony to drop the price of their PlayStation 3. Because people were not going to pay that much for a console when you can get more or less a similar enough experience with the 360. Xbox was basically doing to the PlayStation 3 what the PlayStation 1 did to the Sega Saturn. It gave people a viable, more affordable option that wasn't a gimmicky child toy like the Nintendo Wii was. It was an actual head-to-head console competition. Now in the case of the Sega Saturn, it played a part in Sega's inevitable console downfall. But in the case of Sony, it created one of the best console generations that the PlayStation brand has ever seen. It was obviously beaten out by the PlayStation 2 before it, but in an effort to not only win back their own fans, but to win back new gamers and new fans that were looking for something that was more of the hardcore gaming experience, they had to deliver. And damn did they deliver. The Last of Us, Gran Turismo 6, God of War 3, and even the Uncharted trilogy. And there's so much more, and it's not even accounting for the games that were timed exclusives for Sony. All of these franchises that either found the next step from what they had before on the previous PlayStation and developed a foundation to build off of going into the next generation of the PlayStation 4, or in franchises like The Last of Us, for example, they knocked everybody's socks off with a brand new title, creating a franchise for the future. And while that's going on, Xbox is forced to continue to deliver in order to keep their fans happy and to bring people into their ecosystem. They continue on with the Halo franchise, bringing not only Halo 3 to the table, but ODST and Reach. All fan favorites to one extent or another. They release Gears of War and it instantly becomes a favorite. You have Mass Effect, the Fable and the Forza Motorsports games, and again, timed exclusives like BioShock. Xbox and PlayStation both sold very well and very competitive worldwide during that generation. And as a result, the people that won were us, the buyers, the customers. No matter which console you bought, between the two of those, you had a great time. And then during all that time, you could argue with your friends about which console Call of Duty looks better on, or Madden, or FIFA. But the point is, we were eating pretty good. But it didn't last that long because going into the next generation, the Xbox One tanked for a plethora of reasons, with the PlayStation 4 outselling it by twice as much. Going into that generation, it was Xbox's turn to realize that they can't just expect people to buy whatever they wanted. They thought they could force you to be always online, they thought that they could charge you whatever they want and make you buy their little Kinect camera, and quickly after that they realized that they were not able to do that. People just wanted to buy a regular console, and the PlayStation 4 was offering that at a cheaper price, forcing Xbox to go back to the drawing board and just release a regular console at the regular price. But the reality is the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One both remained at the prices they were on because of the competition between the two consoles. The Xbox One may have lost, but it still sold close to 60 million units. Which means all of those people that primarily play third-party titles that are across both consoles, if they saw that Sony had upped the price $100 or $200, they easily could have been like, yeah, I'm just gonna go buy the Xbox One so I can play FIFA, or even Fortnite by that point. So despite the fact that the PlayStation 4 did outsell the Xbox One, the competition tamed the market a little bit. Now, during this time, the Wii U also completely dropped the ball, so nobody was really worried about that one. So that did affect us to an extent. But what happened was during the PlayStation 4 era, from a software perspective, while they did have many bangers come out, if you're looking at the first 4 years of the PlayStation 4's life as compared to the first 4 years of the PlayStation 3's life, strictly looking at exclusive games that were exclusive during the first 4-year window on their respective console, with an average Metacritic rating of something like 75 or above, you had double the amount of PlayStation 3 games than PlayStation 4, with the remainder of the lineup being padded out by ports, remasters, and re-releases. And then this just kind of continued on. The Switch came into the picture, they jumped in and added all of their ports and remasters and re-releases, which I uploaded a video about earlier today. And then this just basically continued to be a standard practice going into the late 2010s and up through this console generation. Nobody feels a need to change, and it's because nobody really has competition anymore. Not enough competition anyway. And the problem is, they're all still winning. They're just playing different games. The PlayStation 5 has continued on the initial console war that started from back in the 90s, and even before that in the 80s, but obviously I have a cutoff point for when I was born. If you ask Sony, they've won. They know they won. In every single generation, they've won. And even if they start to lose, they change the numbers so that they've won. And that matters to them, and it matters to their fan base. It's very important, because it's part of their identity. If you ask Nintendo, they've won. Who cares about the hardcore gamer? We give you handheld and hybrid devices. We make a lot of money on low-budget games. Our affordable Switch 1, being a hybrid console, has allowed multiple consoles to exist in a single household. Clearly, Nintendo believes they've won. And Xbox, Microsoft, being the endless pool of money that they are, found a way to become part of the industry, even if they don't have the most sales. They want you on their subscription. They want their games on every console, as well as the PC. The console itself is no longer important, and we kind of felt this going into this generation, but I think it's more clear now than it ever was before. In the same manner that there is an ocean of different types of Windows PCs. It doesn't matter which brand is building that computer, they want Windows running on that PC. But to offer people a chance to purchase a device that is built from the ground up by Microsoft, well, not including the outsourcing, they've provided people with a Surface lineup. More or less a chance to just make more money, and if people buy it, great. If they don't buy it, that's fine. They're going to buy another PC and they're still going to get Windows. I think it's more clear now than ever that this is the approach for Xbox going forward. And again, this is not a new realization. This feels like the inevitability that we have been moving towards. Microsoft will buy out every single large gaming studio. They will throw all of their games on every device possible in order to get as large of a player base on these softwares as they can. And then every few years, they'll provide you with a new piece of hardware, in case you don't have a PlayStation or you don't have a PC that can run these games. They'll give you a budget option, they'll give you a more expensive and high-powered option, but it doesn't really matter too much to them whether or not you buy it. What's more important is that their games are being purchased by wherever the most people are. And obviously their end goal is everybody to be subscribed to Game Pass at some point. But if you ask Xbox if they are winning or losing the console generation, they won't say they're losing. Even amongst themselves, they don't think they've lost. They recently came out and said that Xbox is the top publisher on PlayStation's own consoles. As far as they're concerned, they've infiltrated the competition and they've won. So if PlayStation has won, and Microsoft has won, and Nintendo has won, who's lost? Well, if there's a winner, there's gotta be a loser. And if the corporations are winning, it's the customer that's losing. Because effectively, there are no more alternatives. If you want that family-friendly budget experience, and really the only game console that you can play on the bus or out of the house without a TV at this point, then your only option is Nintendo. And Nintendo knows that. So in their minds, they can charge you whatever they like. If you want the high-powered console, well, at this point, really there's no other choice but the PS5. Because Microsoft has shown that they don't care to compete head-to-head with the PS5 in the same way that they have in years past. They don't need to make the Xbox as appealing because all of their games are either on PC or on PlayStation at this point. So they can increase the price of their hardware. If somebody buys it, great. If they don't, also great. They don't care that much. Which means if you're part of the hardcore crowd, really your only console choice is the PlayStation 5. So now Sony can charge whatever they'd like. Nothing will hold them back. During the PS4 generation, they couldn't get too carried away with the price of their hardware, and even their software to a major extent. But because of how well they were doing compared to the competition, they could drastically slow down on the release of their new titles and make a crap ton of money on their old stuff, their re-releases and remasters. Because it wasn't as important to win you over as it was during the PlayStation 3 era, since they effectively have already won you over. With the PS5 era, not only does that trend continue with the games, but now they don't need to care about the hardware. If you want a pro console, you're going to pay their pro price. And when the PlayStation 6 comes out, they're fairly confident that they can charge you whatever they want, because you effectively no longer have an alternative. At this point, the entire industry is just playing the same game. They're all going to focus on whatever it is that brings in the most money for them, and together they're just going to make more and more money. Now, we're talking hypotheticals here at this point, but potentially we could see a Nintendo vs. Sony situation that brings things back down a little bit. I don't know how realistic this is to assume because a lot of people just seem to enjoy spending money on every single hardware, but Nintendo raising up their price could mean that there's a head-to-head between them and Sony. Because now with Nintendo having a console at $450 and the PlayStation 5 for now still being close enough to that price, many people that might have owned both a PlayStation 4 and a Nintendo Switch might be thinking more along the lines of either getting a PlayStation 5 or a Nintendo Switch 2. Or in a few years when the PlayStation 6 comes out, they might be debating between the Switch 2 and the PlayStation 6. Because I feel like at some point people are going to be like, well, this is kind of pricey. I don't know if it's worth dropping this much money on it. So if we get into a hypothetical situation where it becomes Nintendo versus Sony again, you could maybe see a situation that when the PlayStation 6 launches, Sony has to think to themselves, hang on, if I go too high up, people are probably just going to skip out and go for the Nintendo console. But the issue is, despite the fact that the Nintendo Switch 2 is a lot stronger than the Nintendo Switch 1, it's still not completely the highest and latest tech. There's still that little bit of a half-gen drop-off, maybe even a full generation compared to the competition. So while there may be many casuals that decide to flip a coin between the PlayStation 5 and the Nintendo Switch 2, it seems extremely unlikely that people that are hardcore gamers will find themselves willing to go down to the Nintendo Switch 2 only. And likewise, it seems extremely unlikely that people that are all about Nintendo and the handheld family brand to decide to scrap it and just go for the PlayStation 5 instead. The hope is that there is enough of a discrepancy between the two consoles in which people don't buy both, because if they buy both, then they both win and the prices just keep going up. But if the people that had both end up picking one or the other, then we could potentially find ourselves back into a buyer's market, so to speak, where the sellers will have to win our purchase. Otherwise, what happens is the PlayStation 6 comes out for $650 or $700, and then people are like, well, yeah, I dropped $1,200 and I have my Switch 2 and I have my PlayStation 6, and now both Sony and Nintendo can keep doing what they want. But the point is that if there is no competition, the prices will just keep going up. And that is currently what we're seeing in front of our faces. Now, this has led to a lot more of a discussion around PC gaming, as well as the Steam Decks. And I think that requires its own further breakdown, and I don't know if I'm equipped enough to make that breakdown just yet. I've gained quite a bit of a PC gaming following in the past month, and the last thing I'd want is to say something incorrect. But looking at it on the surface, at least at this point in time, it seems like PC gaming and console gaming can continue to coexist. And even with the release of the Steam Deck, it hasn't really created that much of a competition. PC gamers are going to PC game and console gamers are going to console game, and people that do both are going to do both. So even if you include that into the equation, it doesn't really change much. Now you could argue until the cows come home about why the PC is the smarter choice or why the Steam Deck is the smarter choice, but that doesn't really change what the reality is. And unfortunately, I'm not confident enough to make a claim that the Steam Deck will be the reason that the Switch 2 fails. It might be, but I'm not confident enough to say that it will. Nor am I confident enough to say that people are going to see how expensive the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X have become, and so they'll just decide, screw it, I'm done with console gaming and I'm only going to PC. Even if many of you listening to this are undoubtedly already on that train, the wide open world of console gamers only gets larger and larger as time goes on. Now, that being said, historically speaking, one of the biggest drawbacks of PC gaming was that initial upfront cost. A console is much more affordable than a PC if you want to play it on the high end, and obviously because a PC does a lot more than what a gaming console does. So with the rise in prices of consoles, that may open people's eyes. But the problem is that the PC prices are going up as well. That initial upfront cost matters a lot more than you think. If a mom is buying her kids something for them to play games on, and all they need to do is buy a PlayStation for $500, or in her case, drop over $1,000 on something that she doesn't quite understand how nuanced it is, it's way easier for her just to be like, yeah, everybody's got a PlayStation, all his friends have a PlayStation, he's asking for a PlayStation, I'm just gonna get him a PlayStation. Unless the Steam Deck grows to the point where it can convince people that it is a pillar of the gaming industry, of the console specifically gaming industry, then it won't be able to pull those people away from the market. Not entirely, at least. Again, if you're watching this video and listening to me speak, this won't necessarily apply to you. But for the masses, it won't be enough. So, yeah. Sorry to once again go doom and gloom on this, but the more I dig into the current gaming climate, the more I realize how bad it's gotten, how much worse it could easily get. And as somebody that has a passion in gaming and has had a passion in gaming his entire life, it kind of sucks. There's not really any way to sugarcoat it. It sucks. And I'm not just saying that for myself. Like, I can go buy games and play games. That's not my issue. It's just the industry as a whole is kind of bleak. And I think about how gaming was so simple yet so enjoyable through most of my life. And I realize that's partially because I am now a grown man and not a child anymore. But it kind of makes me sad for the future of this industry that I've loved for my entire life. It makes me sad that effectively the type of gaming industry that I grew up around will not be repeated for future generations. Unless, of course, we have another massive crash and everything just kind of starts over again. But I guess we will have to wait and see. Thanks again for joining. I will catch you on the next one.